The sun had barely risen when the FBI officer began his day. He was driving through the quiet streets of a small city, on a routine assignment that should have been simple and uneventful. The streets were empty, the morning air cool, and he felt the calm that often accompanies early hours. He had been in law enforcement for years and had faced many dangerous situations, but nothing in his career could prepare him for what was about to happen. He was attentive, observing everything around him. The shops were just opening and a few early commuters walked along the sidewalks. He noticed a police patrol car following him from a distance. At first he thought it was a routine check, but as the vehicle kept pace, he became aware that something felt wrong. The officer had a strong instinct for danger, and it told him to stay alert. He pulled his car to the side as the patrol car signaled him to stop. He remained calm, keeping his hands visible on the steering wheel. The patrol officers approached his vehicle, their faces stern. The officer rolled down his window, ready to explain that he was on official duty, expecting the situation to clear quickly. Instead, the situation escalated immediately. One of the local officers drew a gun and pointed it directly at him. The FBI officer froze for a moment, shock washing over him. He had faced dangerous criminals before, but being threatened by fellow law enforcement was something he had never imagined. He could see the tension in the eyes of the officers. It was not just a standard procedure. There was fear, hostility, and something else he could not immediately identify. He spoke calmly, identifying himself as an FBI officer. He showed his badge and credentials, but the officers did not lower their weapons. Their voices were sharp, demanding, and filled with suspicion. The FBI officer kept his hands raised, showing no signs of aggression, while trying to reason with them. He was trained to de-escalate, and he knew that any sudden move could make the situation worse. He noticed a few pedestrians slowing down to watch, their curiosity mixed with concern. The officer remained composed, speaking in a calm and firm tone, explaining that he was not a threat and that he was on official duty. He tried to make eye contact, hoping the human connection would bring reason to the situation, but the officers seemed determined to assert control over him. The FBI officer thought about his options. He had to remain calm, follow protocol, and ensure his safety. He knew that resisting could be dangerous, but compliance did not mean giving up his dignity or his rights. He stayed focused on the officer's actions, noting everything for the record. His training kicked in, reminding him that documenting behavior could be crucial later. As the standoff continued, he felt a mix of disbelief and frustration. How could colleagues trained to uphold the law treat him like a criminal without cause? The officer's hostility seemed rooted in prejudice rather than procedure. It was a painful realization, but he knew he had to stay professional. Any loss of control could escalate the situation into violence. He remained patient, speaking with a calm voice. "I am an FBI officer. I am not a threat. Please allow me to explain." But the officers did not respond to reason. Their actions were driven by fear and bias, not logic. The FBI officer recognized the danger of the moment, knowing that he had to manage it carefully to avoid tragedy. Time seemed to stretch as the tension grew. The officer's mind raced, calculating each step while maintaining outward calm. He had trained for crisis situations, but this was personal in a way that most threats were not. He was being judged not for his actions, but for who he was in the eyes of the officers. It was a harsh reminder that prejudice could override justice, even within law enforcement. He noticed his phone vibrating in his pocket. Messages from the FBI headquarters were appearing, confirming that he was being monitored and that help was on the way. This knowledge provided a small sense of relief, but the immediate danger remained. The officers were still pointing their weapons, and any sudden movement could trigger a disastrous outcome. He continued speaking calmly, trying different approaches to reason with the officers. He referenced protocols, identification, and authority, hoping that logic might penetrate their prejudice. But the hostility persisted. The FBI officer understood that sometimes human bias could blind people to facts, no matter how clear they were. Passers-by were beginning to gather, sensing that something serious was unfolding. Some were taking out their phones to record, their expressions a mix of concern and fear. The FBI officer remained composed, aware that public attention could help de-escalate the situation. but also knowing that it could complicate things further if the officers felt challenged or threatened. The sun was higher now, casting shadows across the street. The officer could feel the weight of the moment pressing down. He remained focused on breathing, keeping a steady rhythm to maintain calm. He thought about his family, his career, and his commitment to justice. This was a test of patience, courage, and resilience. Every minute felt like an hour. The FBI officer's mind was alert, scanning for exits, safe actions, and ways to diffuse the tension. He thought about the power of words and calm demeanor, realizing that his survival depended on controlling not just his body, but the atmosphere around him eventually. One of the officers lowered his weapon slightly, but suspicion still burned in his eyes. The FBI officer used this moment to speak more firmly yet gently, emphasizing his identity, authority, and the importance of professional conduct. He tried to appeal to their sense of duty and reason, but it was clear that bias had clouded judgment. The street remained tense. Pedestrians whispered among themselves, unsure whether to intervene or stay back. The FBI officer stayed in his car, hands visible, speaking calmly, waiting for a resolution. Every instinct told him to stay alert, protect himself, and survive the encounter without escalating it further. As the first part of this harrowing day drew to a close, the FBI officer understood one thing clearly. The danger was not just from criminals outside the law, but sometimes from those within it. He remained calm, professional, and observant, knowing that every action, every word, and every moment of patience could be the difference between safety and disaster. The day had just begun, and the officer was determined to face whatever came next with courage, integrity, and the careful attention that had always guided his career. The tension on the street continued to build as the FBI officer remained in his car, hands visible and heart pounding. He could feel the eyes of the officers on him, sharp and unyielding, watching for the smallest movement that might give them a reason to act. The morning air was thick with uncertainty. He had faced dangerous criminals before, but never had he been treated as a threat by those who were supposed to protect the law. The officers' voices grew louder, their commands sharper, each word filled with suspicion. They demanded that he step out of the vehicle immediately. The FBI officer complied slowly, keeping his hands where they could be seen. Every step he took was careful, measured as he tried to show that he meant no harm. His training had taught him that sudden movements could provoke a dangerous response, and he followed that lesson to the letter. One of the officers, a large man with a hard expression, was particularly aggressive. He shouted, asking why the officer was in the area, questioning his presence as though he were guilty by default. The FBI officer responded calmly, giving his explanation, stating clearly that he was on official duty. He showed his credentials again, hoping that this time the proof of his identity would end the confrontation. But the officer did not lower his weapon. The tension between them was thick enough to feel in the chest, a weight pressing down on every word spoken. The FBI officer noticed the people who had gathered nearby. Some were standing quietly, watching in disbelief, while others cautiously raised their phones to record what was happening. He understood that witnesses could be a form of protection. Their presence might make the officers think twice before doing anything rash. He kept his voice steady, trying to speak in a calm, authoritative tone that would reach reason even if prejudice clouded their minds. He also noticed that the officers seemed on edge, their eyes darting to each other and back at him. It was clear that they had not expected to encounter someone with his authority, someone trained to handle dangerous situations with professionalism. The FBI officer used this moment to his advantage, maintaining eye contact with both of them, projecting calm and control, trying to bridge the divide between fear and understanding. Despite his careful actions, the officers continued to escalate the situation. They accused him of lying, suggesting that his identification was fake. The FBI officer stayed patient, explaining the chain of command and the protocols that verified his authority.
He did not shout or argue.
He remained composed, aware that raising his voice might make them feel threatened and could trigger violence. His every action was a test of patience, a careful balancing act between asserting his identity and not provoking an attack. He thought about the irony of the situation. Here he was, someone who had spent years upholding the law, teaching others about procedure, handling dangerous criminals, and working tirelessly for justice, and yet he was treated with suspicion and hostility because of who he was. It was a hard lesson in the power of prejudice, the danger of assumptions, and the ways fear could blind judgment. The officers kept their distance, but the gun never left the hand of the most aggressive one. The FBI officer took note of their positioning, planning mentally how he could move safely if needed. His mind was active, constantly calculating risks and potential outcomes while his body remained calm and collected. He knew that showing fear could make the situation worse, but remaining completely stoic could also be misread. He tried to project an aura of controlled authority. Meanwhile, he continued to speak in a steady voice. He explained again that he was on official duty, that he had no intentions to harm anyone, and that any misunderstanding could be clarified immediately. He asked if they could verify his credentials with headquarters, offering a simple solution to the conflict. The officers hesitated, their expressions a mix of doubt and caution. The FBI officer recognized that even small gestures could shift the dynamic slightly in his favor. The tension seemed to stretch for minutes that felt like hours. The officer's heart beat steadily, but adrenaline ran through him, sharpening his senses. He noticed small details, the way the wind moved papers on the nearby cars, the distant hum of traffic, the way shadows fell across the street. Everything could be relevant. Everything could change the outcome of this confrontation. He focused on the present, aware that thinking too far ahead could create mistakes. He also thought about the people around him. Witnesses could provide safety, but they could also add unpredictability. He kept aware of their positions, hoping they would remain calm. He knew that any sudden action by someone in the crowd could escalate the situation further. His role was not only to protect himself, but to prevent harm to those around him. The officers finally asked more questions, their tone slightly less aggressive, though still filled with suspicion. The FBI officer answered each question calmly, providing clear and concise responses. He understood that clarity was crucial, that confusion could be dangerous. His words were precise, his demeanor composed, and his body language open, showing no hint of aggression. He noticed subtle changes in the officer's posture. Their grip on the weapon tightened and loosened intermittently, showing that they were uncertain. He used this uncertainty to maintain calm, continuing to speak in a professional, patient manner. Every word, every gesture was calculated to reduce tension and demonstrate that he was not a threat. As time passed, the presence of his colleagues from the FBI was felt. He received a quiet alert that backup was on its way, monitoring the situation closely. This news gave him a small boost of confidence. He knew he was not alone, and that support would arrive if things went wrong. But he also knew that until then, he had to rely on his own skills, his patience, and his ability to manage human behavior under extreme stress. He continued to maintain dialogue with the officers, trying to connect on a human level. He emphasized shared responsibility, professionalism, and the importance of following protocol. He avoided confrontation, focusing instead on collaboration and mutual understanding. He understood that fear and bias were powerful forces, and that his role was to counter them with calm, clarity, and patience. Minutes stretched by, each one heavy with uncertainty. He noticed the officers exchanging glances, their confidence wavering slightly. He saw that patience and composure were beginning to have an effect, even if small. He continued to speak, reinforcing his identity and authority, carefully avoiding anything that could escalate the confrontation. The situation remained delicate. The FBI officer knew that any misstep could trigger violence. He stayed alert, watching for the slightest movement, ready to respond if necessary. But he also remained calm, knowing that panic could worsen the situation. His training and experience guided him through each moment, helping him maintain control under extreme pressure. The sun rose higher, casting light on the tense scene. The officer continued to speak in calm, steady tones, repeating information when necessary and clarifying any confusion. He maintained open, non-threatening body language, showing that he had nothing to hide and no intention of causing harm. Every action, every word was deliberate, aimed at de-escalating a situation fueled by prejudice and misunderstanding. As the standoff continued, he remained vigilant, aware of every detail, and focused on survival. His mind worked methodically, balancing risk, communication, and observation. He understood that patience, composure, and professionalism were his best tools. He also knew that the outcome depended on the actions of others, and that he had to manage the situation with both intelligence and empathy. The FBI officer's thoughts were clear. Remain calm, stay safe, and use every tool at his disposal to navigate a dangerous and unexpected situation. He relied on his training, his experience, and his judgment to face a challenge that was as much about human behavior as it was about law enforcement. The morning continued, tense and uncertain, with the FBI officer standing firm, demonstrating courage, patience, and professionalism in the face of danger. Despite his calm and measured approach, the situation escalated rapidly. One of the officers, still holding the gun, signaled to another, and suddenly the FBI officer felt hands on his arms, forcing him to the ground. Shock ran through him as he realized that the officers had decided to arrest him, despite his credentials, despite his clear identification. He stayed focused, reminding himself that compliance and patience were his best defenses in this moment. Panic could be dangerous. He had to stay in control. He was handcuffed, and the cold metal around his wrists was a jarring contrast to the warmth of the morning sun. Every movement was deliberate, his mind alert for any sign of escalation. He had been trained to deal with dangerous criminals, but now the threat came from those who were supposed to be allies. The officers treated him as if he had committed a crime, their suspicion thick in every gesture and word. Witnesses on the street watched in disbelief. They had seen many things in their lives, but this was different. The FBI officer, someone whose role was to protect and enforce the law, was being detained as a criminal. Phones captured the scene from multiple angles, the voices of shocked onlookers blending with the commands of the officers. The tension was almost unbearable, yet he maintained a composed demeanor, demonstrating control and professionalism. He was led to a police car, the officers keeping their weapons trained on him the entire time. He thought about the irony of the situation, the unfairness of being treated as guilty while doing nothing wrong. He reminded himself that he had to remain calm, not just for his safety, but to prevent the situation from escalating into violence. His training and experience guided his actions, helping him stay composed under pressure. Inside the police car, he remained vigilant. He observed the officers, their behavior, their expressions, noting inconsistencies and signs of bias. Every detail could be important later, in court or in internal investigations. He remained silent for a while, letting the officers talk, observing their actions without reacting impulsively. This was a dangerous moment, but he understood that patience and careful observation could help him navigate it safely. The journey to the local jail was tense. The officers spoke among themselves, occasionally casting glances at him. He responded only when necessary, always in a calm, steady voice. He knew that words could either escalate or de-escalate the situation, and he chose them carefully. His mind raced, thinking through the procedures he would face in jail and how he could maintain his safety and professionalism in a confined, potentially hostile environment. Upon arrival at the jail, the FBI officer was processed like any other detainee. The cold institutional environment contrasted sharply with the sunny streets outside. He kept his composure, following instructions while maintaining a mental record of every step. He understood that documentation and attention to detail could be crucial in proving the injustice he had suffered. Every interaction, every word, every glance was recorded in his mind. Other inmates observed him, noticing the calm and professional demeanor he maintained despite the circumstances. Some offered small gestures of respect or sympathy, understanding that he was not an ordinary detainee. He recognized the importance of keeping interactions respectful but cautious, balancing friendliness with vigilance. In this new environment, every action mattered, and he moved carefully, maintaining his presence and authority through composure. The officers who had arrested him began their routine duties, but he remained aware that their bias and prejudice had driven this action. He thought about the broader implications, how systemic issues within law enforcement could allow such misconduct to occur. While he could not change the moment, he could prepare for the aftermath, ensuring that justice would eventually prevail. His training reminded him that patience, professionalism, and strategic thinking were essential. Communication with jail staff was deliberate and precise. He made it clear who he was, but he did so calmly, avoiding confrontation. He understood that asserting authority aggressively could backfire in a confined environment. His goal was to maintain safety, protect his rights, and document the situation for later review. Each interaction was measured, balancing assertiveness with restraint. Throughout the process, he reflected on the absurdity and injustice of the situation. How could those entrusted with enforcing the law act with such prejudice, targeting someone who represented the very institution they were supposed to respect? He recognized the deep flaws in human behavior, how fear and bias could override reason and justice. Yet he also saw an opportunity to bring attention to these flaws, to ensure accountability. The FBI officer remained focused on the present, aware that his reactions could influence the outcome. He monitored the officers' behavior, their tone and their movements, planning mentally how to respond to any escalation. He knew that composure, clarity, and strategic thinking were his best tools in navigating this dangerous and unexpected situation. As he was placed in a holding cell, he observed the environment carefully. The jail was stark, cold, and designed to assert control over those within it. He maintained his posture, his composure, and his awareness, understanding that every detail could be relevant in ensuring safety and documenting the experience. He greeted staff politely but cautiously, asserting his professionalism without provoking unnecessary conflict. Inside the cell, he had moments of reflection. The situation was surreal, yet he stayed grounded in the reality of his role and his responsibilities. He thought about the principles of law enforcement, justice, and integrity, and how he could uphold these values even while being treated unfairly. His experience, training, and moral compass guided him, helping him navigate the emotional and psychological challenges of being unjustly detained. He considered the witnesses outside, the recordings on phones, and the attention the situation was beginning to draw. Public awareness could play a role in ensuring accountability. He made mental notes of the timing, actions, and words of the officers, preparing for the eventual review by internal affairs and legal proceedings. Every detail mattered, and he remained meticulous in observation. The hours passed slowly in the holding cell. He remained calm, using the time to reflect, observe, and plan. He interacted with jail staff carefully, maintaining professionalism and politeness while protecting his rights. He understood that every action and word could have consequences, and he acted with patience, clarity, and dignity. Despite the injustice and personal risk, the FBI officer maintained a sense of purpose. He knew that the incident was not just about him, but about exposing bias, promoting accountability, and demonstrating the importance of integrity in law enforcement. He resolved to handle the situation with professionalism, patience, and careful documentation, ensuring that the truth would eventually come to light. Throughout the day, he remained vigilant, observing every detail, every interaction, and every nuance of behavior. He knew that composure, patience, and attention to detail were his most powerful tools in navigating this unjust situation. Even in the face of hostility and prejudice, he stayed focused, professional, and aware, embodying the principles of law enforcement and justice he had dedicated his life to upholding. As night approached, the FBI officer remained in his cell, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. He had faced danger and injustice, yet he had maintained his composure, professionalism, and awareness. He knew that the next steps would involve legal proceedings, investigations, and public scrutiny, and he was prepared to face them with the same patience, integrity, and dedication that had guided him through this harrowing day. The FBI officer sat in the jail cell, the cold concrete walls surrounding him a stark reminder of the injustice he had just experienced. Every sound echoed, from the clanging of metal doors to the muffled conversations of other inmates. Despite the situation, he maintained his calm demeanor, understanding that panic or aggression would serve no purpose. He observed his surroundings carefully, taking note of the guards' routines, the behavior of the other detainees, and the overall environment of the jail. He had always known that law enforcement was not immune to human error and prejudice, but experiencing it firsthand was a jarring lesson. The officers who had arrested him had ignored protocol, disregarded his identity, and allowed bias to guide their actions. The FBI officer knew that while the situation was deeply unfair, how he responded now would be crucial for his safety, his credibility, and the eventual outcome of the investigation. The jail staff processed him with efficiency, reading him his rights and assigning him to a holding area. He complied with every instruction, moving calmly and deliberately. His body language was composed, showing no sign of fear or hostility. He knew that maintaining control over his own behavior was the first step in ensuring that the officers and staff treated him appropriately. Every step was calculated, every movement purposeful. As he settled into the holding cell, he began to think strategically about the situation. He mentally noted the sequence of events, the words spoken by the officers and the reactions of witnesses. These details would be important for the FBI investigation, for internal affairs, and for public accountability. He understood the value of patience and meticulous record-keeping, knowing that clear documentation could be more powerful than confrontation. The other inmates in the cell observed him with curiosity. Some whispered among themselves, speculating about his identity and the reason for his detention. The FBI officer recognized that his behavior would influence how others perceived him. He remained respectful, polite, and professional, answering questions with measured words and without drawing unnecessary attention. His presence alone conveyed a sense of authority and control. He reflected on the broader implications of the incident. The actions of the local officers were not just a personal affront, but an example of systemic issues that could affect anyone. Bias, fear, and misuse of power could undermine trust and safety in communities. He resolved that while he could not change the past, he could contribute to reform and accountability through careful action, documentation, and persistence. The jail routine continued, with guards moving through the corridors, processing other detainees, and maintaining order. The FBI officer observed the interactions, noting both professionalism and lapses in behavior. He remained vigilant, aware that in such an environment any misstep could escalate into conflict. His experience and training guided him, helping him navigate the delicate balance between compliance and assertion of his rights. He began to communicate with the jail staff in a calm and professional manner. He clarified his status as an FBI officer without being confrontational, ensuring that they understood the gravity of the situation. The staff treated him with a mixture of respect and caution, recognizing his credentials but also following their own protocols. The FBI officer appreciated their diligence and maintained a cooperative attitude, knowing that collaboration would aid his safety and the resolution of the incident. Throughout the day, he remained mentally active, thinking about the next steps in the broader context of the arrest. He considered how the situation would be viewed by the FBI, the media, and the public. He planned how to present his account clearly and accurately, ensuring that facts were documented and bias was highlighted. His focus was not on anger or frustration, but on achieving justice and accountability. The presence of other inmates provided a unique perspective. Some of them had faced unjust treatment themselves, and the FBI officer could sense empathy in their gestures and expressions. He understood the power of human connection, even in a stressful and confined environment. By maintaining professionalism and respect, he fostered a calm atmosphere that influenced those around him, reducing the likelihood of conflict. Hours passed, and he remained patient and observant. He noticed patterns in the behavior of the guards, the timing of movements, and the routines of the jail. Every detail was recorded mentally, a careful catalog of events that would serve as evidence and insight. He also reflected on his own emotional state, practicing mindfulness to maintain calm and focus despite the injustice. The FBI officer considered the implications of the incident for law enforcement as a whole. He knew that systemic change required accountability, awareness, and courage. His own experience could serve as a case study, highlighting the need for proper training, bias mitigation, and clear protocols. He resolved to approach the situation with integrity, ensuring that his actions would contribute to meaningful outcomes beyond his personal ordeal. He communicated intermittently with his colleagues, receiving updates and support from the FBI headquarters. Knowing that help was available provided a measure of reassurance. Yet he remained focused on the present, aware that his immediate actions could determine the course of the day. He maintained composure, professionalism, and vigilance, understanding that these traits were his greatest assets. As night approached, the FBI officer remained in the holding cell, reflecting on the day's events. He thought about the lessons learned, the challenges faced, and the resilience required to navigate such a situation. Despite the injustice, he felt a sense of purpose, knowing that his actions, demeanor, and documentation could lead to accountability and reform. The jail environment was quieting, The echoes of earlier commotion fading into the background, the FBI officer continued to observe, remaining alert to any changes. He practiced patience, understanding that each moment of composure contributed to his safety and to the eventual resolution. His mind was active, analyzing, recording, and planning, even in the midst of confinement. He reflected on human behavior, prejudice, and the responsibility of those in positions of authority. The incident was a stark reminder of the potential for misuse of power and the importance of vigilance, integrity, and professionalism. He resolved to continue his work with renewed dedication, using his experience to educate, reform, and advocate for fairness and justice. Throughout the evening, he maintained his composure, engaging with jail staff and other detainees respectfully while observing every detail. He understood that the situation was temporary and that patience, professionalism, and careful documentation would ensure that the truth prevailed. He remained calm, aware, and focused, embodying the principles of law enforcement and justice in the face of adversity. The day ended with the FBI officer reflecting on the journey so far. He had faced danger, injustice, and prejudice, yet he had maintained control over his actions, demeanor, and thoughts. He knew that the next steps would involve investigations, accountability, and public awareness. He was ready to face them with the same patience, integrity, and professionalism that had guided him through this challenging day. The experience, while difficult, reinforced his commitment to justice, human dignity, and the careful observation and action required to navigate a complex world. The FBI officer had spent hours in the holding cell, maintaining calm and carefully observing every detail around him. As the day progressed, word reached the local police department that a federal agent had been detained. Immediately, a team at FBI headquarters sprang into action, initiating contact with the local authorities to verify the situation. The FBI officer, despite the discomfort and frustration, felt a small sense of relief knowing that help was on the way. In the jail, he continued to interact politely with the staff, providing his credentials and explaining his official duties when necessary. He was careful not to be confrontational, understanding that compliance combined with calm professionalism could prevent further escalation. His demeanor remained steady, a quiet authority that did not rely on force but on patience and presence. Meanwhile, investigators and FBI colleagues began piecing together the timeline of the events. The agency quickly realized the seriousness of the situation. An FBI agent had been pointed at with a gun and wrongfully detained due to prejudice. Communications flowed rapidly, and legal channels were engaged to ensure that the officer's rights would be protected and the officers involved would be held accountable. Inside the cell, the FBI officer maintained mental clarity. He recorded everything in his mind: the behavior of the officers, the timing of commands, the reactions of bystanders, and the environment within the jail. Each detail was critical for the investigation that would follow, and he remained disciplined in documenting even the smallest actions and gestures. As hours passed, the atmosphere outside began to shift. Local news outlets, alerted by eyewitnesses and the initial reporting of the incident, started covering the story. Social media posts appeared, showing videos of the arrest and capturing the disbelief of those who witnessed the event. Public attention grew, adding pressure on the local police department and reinforcing the urgency of resolving the situation appropriately. The FBI officer's colleagues arrived at the local station to coordinate with law enforcement leadership. They engaged in conversations with the arresting officers, reviewing the evidence and presenting the credentials and authority of the detained agent. The officers who had committed the wrongful arrest faced immediate scrutiny, their actions questioned and investigated. The FBI agent, meanwhile, continued to demonstrate composure, ready to provide accurate and factual accounts to support the investigation. During the day, the officer also reflected on the courage it took to navigate such a situation. He had faced criminals, threats, and dangerous encounters before, but being wrongfully treated by those in law enforcement was a unique challenge. He understood that maintaining professionalism, patience, and careful observation could not only ensure his own safety but also serve as a model for how to handle systemic issues of bias and misconduct. The tension gradually began to ease as the FBI intervention progressed. The local officers realized the gravity of the situation and started to cooperate. Some showed remorse and a willingness to rectify their mistakes, while others remained defensive. The FBI officer continued to speak clearly and calmly, reinforcing the importance of following proper procedures and respecting authority. He understood that every interaction could influence the resolution and the accountability that would follow. Outside the jail, community members and concerned citizens began discussing the incident. The story highlighted not only the immediate injustice, but also the broader issues of bias and misuse of authority in law enforcement. People debated, shared their opinions, and questioned the systems that allowed such incidents to occur. The FBI officer's ordeal became a catalyst for conversation, reflection, and awareness within the community. Inside, the officer was aware of the media attention, but remained focused on his immediate environment. He continued to engage with jail staff respectfully, ensuring that they understood his role and the seriousness of the situation. He also monitored the behavior of the arresting officers, noting inconsistencies and potential areas for accountability. His composure and professionalism continued to influence those around him, creating a sense of order amidst the chaos. Eventually, after careful coordination between the FBI and local authorities, the wrongful arrest was formally recognized. The officers involved were instructed to release the FBI agent immediately and cooperate with the investigation. The process of release was conducted with attention to protocol, ensuring that the officer's dignity was restored and that all legal requirements were met. Once released, the FBI officer took a moment to breathe deeply, appreciating the small sense of relief that came with freedom. He remained professional, speaking to his colleagues, the local authorities, and witnesses, making sure that the facts were clear and documented. He avoided confrontation or anger, focusing instead on clarity, accuracy, and the pursuit of accountability. The release marked not only the end of a personal ordeal but also the beginning of a broader process to ensure justice. The FBI officer understood that his experience would contribute to reforms, training improvements, and awareness about the dangers of prejudice within law enforcement. He committed to participating fully in any investigations, providing evidence, testimony, and insights from his perspective. As the evening set in, the officer reflected on the events of the day. The situation had tested his patience, courage, and professional skills. He had faced fear, injustice, and bias, yet he had maintained composure, clarity, and focus. He knew that the journey ahead would involve legal proceedings, accountability measures, and public awareness, and he felt prepared to navigate them with integrity. He also considered the lessons learned. Even in positions of authority, human error and prejudice could create dangerous situations. The importance of patience, clear communication, and professionalism was reinforced. He had demonstrated that maintaining these qualities even under extreme stress could influence outcomes, protect safety, and support accountability. The FBI officer's colleagues praised his composure and meticulous attention to detail. They understood that his actions had not only ensured his safety, but had also strengthened the investigation and the pursuit of justice. The experience became a reference point for training and awareness, highlighting the need for vigilance, professionalism, and integrity within law enforcement. The officer took time to connect with his family and colleagues, sharing the experience calmly and clearly. He did not dwell on anger or frustration, but focused on the facts, the lessons, and the path forward. His professionalism and clarity served as a model for how to handle difficult situations with dignity and purpose. By the end of the day, the immediate crisis had passed, but the implications were far-reaching. The FBI officer had not only survived a dangerous and unjust situation, but had also contributed to accountability, awareness, and the promotion of ethical conduct in law enforcement. His actions underscored the importance of patience, professionalism, and careful observation in navigating challenging circumstances. He understood that the story would have lasting effects, both for the officers involved and for the broader community. His experience highlighted the need for systemic improvements, for training that addressed bias, and for protocols that ensured justice and safety. The FBI officer remained committed to these principles, ready to advocate for change and to serve as an example of courage and integrity in the face of adversity. As he left the jail, the sun setting behind him, he carried with him not just the relief of freedom, but the awareness that the fight for justice extended beyond a single incident. The day had tested him in ways few could imagine, but it had also strengthened his resolve to pursue fairness, accountability, and integrity in every aspect of his work. He walked forward with purpose, calm, and a renewed commitment to the principles that had guided his career, ready to face the next chapter with the same courage, patience, and professionalism that had seen him through this extraordinary day. After the release from the jail, the FBI officer felt a mix of relief and reflection. The danger and tension of the day were behind him, but the emotional weight of being wrongfully detained and threatened lingered. He knew that what had happened was not just an isolated incident, but a reflection of deeper issues in law enforcement. He took a moment to process everything, breathing in the cool evening air, aware that his work in seeking justice was not yet over. Once back at a secure location, he met with his colleagues and FBI leadership. They went over every detail of the incident, discussing what had occurred, the actions of the local officers, and the timeline of events. The officer recounted everything calmly and clearly, emphasizing his observations, the reactions of the officers, and the behavior of witnesses. His meticulous attention to detail and professional demeanor had created a strong foundation for the investigation. The FBI leadership immediately began internal processes to ensure accountability. The officers involved in the wrongful detention were identified, and their past conduct reviewed. Evidence, including recordings from witnesses and video footage, was collected. The agency emphasized transparency and professionalism, showing the community that such misconduct would not be tolerated, and that every officer, regardless of rank, would be held responsible for their actions. The FBI officer reflected on how quickly public awareness had grown. Videos shared on social media, eyewitness accounts, and news coverage had captured the public's attention. People were shocked and outraged that a trained federal agent could be treated this way by local law enforcement. While this attention added pressure, it also brought a sense of hope that accountability would follow, and that the incident could lead to broader discussions about bias and proper conduct within police departments. Throughout the following days, the officer worked closely with investigators. He provided detailed statements, offering insight into both the behavior of the local officers and the actions he had taken to remain calm and safe. He highlighted how professionalism and patience had been critical in preventing the situation from escalating into violence. His approach was methodical and human-centric, focusing on truth and fairness rather than emotion or retaliation. He also engaged in discussions with training and policy teams, helping to use his experience as a case study for preventing similar incidents in the future. He emphasized the importance of recognizing bias, following proper protocols, and maintaining respect and professionalism even under challenging circumstances. His contributions were aimed at creating meaningful change that would protect both law enforcement personnel and the public. In private moments, the officer thought about the emotional impact of the incident. Being wrongfully treated by those expected to uphold the law was deeply unsettling. Yet he recognized that dwelling on anger or frustration would not serve the greater purpose. Instead, he focused on using the experience to educate, advocate, and bring awareness to systemic issues. He reminded himself that his response could shape outcomes beyond the personal level. He also considered the reactions of his colleagues and the community. Many expressed admiration for his composure and professionalism, noting that his actions had prevented potential harm and had strengthened the investigation. Witnesses and concerned citizens shared their support, recognizing the courage it took to remain calm and focused in such a tense and unfair situation. The officer appreciated their recognition but remained grounded, understanding that the work ahead would require continued dedication. As investigations continued, the local officers involved faced disciplinary actions. The wrongful use of force and failure to follow protocol were formally documented, and the process of accountability unfolded according to legal and professional standards. The FBI officer remained involved, offering testimony and clarification whenever necessary, ensuring that the truth was fully represented and understood. He also reflected on the lessons learned from the experience. Patience, clarity, and professionalism were invaluable tools in navigating danger and injustice. Observing human behavior, maintaining composure, and documenting events meticulously were crucial in protecting safety and ensuring accountability. He resolved to carry these lessons forward, applying them not only in his own work, but also in training and mentoring others within the agency. The incident sparked conversations within the law enforcement community. Training programs and awareness sessions were updated to address bias, proper identification procedures, and respectful engagement with fellow officers. The officer's experience became a reference point, demonstrating how professionalism and calm action could prevent escalation and promote justice even in challenging circumstances. He took time to personally connect with the community, speaking about the importance of transparency, accountability, and fair treatment within law enforcement. His approach was calm, honest, and human-centered, avoiding blame while emphasizing the need for systemic improvement. He understood that meaningful change required dialogue, understanding, and practical solutions. Reflecting on his own emotions, the officer acknowledged the fear and frustration he had felt during the incident. He recognized that these feelings were natural responses to danger and injustice. Yet he also understood the value of channeling these emotions constructively, focusing on action, evidence, and advocacy rather than anger. This perspective reinforced his resilience and commitment to ethical conduct. Over time, the case was resolved with disciplinary actions for the officers involved and measures implemented to prevent future incidents. The FBI officer's role in documenting events, maintaining composure, and supporting the investigation had been critical in achieving accountability. His experience highlighted the importance of professionalism, vigilance, and integrity in all aspects of law enforcement. The officer returned to his regular duties with renewed determination. He carried the experience as both a personal lesson and a professional example. He shared insights with colleagues, participated in training, and contributed to policy discussions, ensuring that his ordeal could benefit others and promote a safer, fairer environment within law enforcement. He also reflected on the broader meaning of justice and responsibility. True professionalism required patience, empathy, and a commitment to doing what was right, even when faced with prejudice or danger. His experience reinforced his belief in these principles, showing that courage and integrity could influence outcomes, protect individuals, and drive systemic change. In quiet moments, he thought about the people who had witnessed the incident, the support he had received from colleagues, and the community's reaction. He felt gratitude for those who had helped, for the transparency of the investigation, and for the opportunity to turn a difficult situation into a lesson for positive change. These reflections strengthened his resolve and guided his approach to future challenges. He knew that the story would remain a powerful example for others. It demonstrated the impact of bias, the dangers of prejudice, and the importance of calm, professional action in difficult circumstances. His experience became a teaching moment, not just within the FBI, but for law enforcement agencies and communities committed to fairness, accountability, and justice. As time passed, the FBI officer continued his work with focus and dedication. He remained committed to the principles that had guided him throughout his career: professionalism, integrity, and careful observation. The incident, while challenging, had reinforced these values and demonstrated their importance in navigating complex, high-stakes situations. In the end, the FBI officer's ordeal became more than a story of injustice. It became a story of resilience, professionalism, and the pursuit of justice. His actions under pressure, his careful attention to detail, and his commitment to fairness and human dignity ensured that the truth prevailed. The experience served as a lasting reminder of the importance of integrity, courage, and thoughtful action in the face of adversity.